My name is Lena, and I never saw the cracks until they cut me. I remember wandering into Uncle Mark's guest room that evening, my hands wrapped around a chipped mug of cold tea, feeling this weird tightness in my chest, like someone squeezed my ribs too hard. It had been one of those nights, you know? The house smelled of damp carpet and old books, and I'd just come from the kitchen, where Mom had been staring at me with eyes that trembled more than her lips. She said, "He wants to talk," but I already felt the pull in my gut, that sick twist that said something was about to break. He sat in that blue armchair by the window, his back straight, jaw locked. I couldn't meet his stare at first, his eyes had that cold edge, like he'd sharpened them on lies. There was this photo frame on the side table, the glass cracked across my reflection. My hand hovered over it, but I didn't touch it. I was halfway grown but felt like a kid again, hard in my throat. "I heard what you told them," he said, voice low, almost calm. But every word felt like a hammer. My mouth went dry, and I wiped my palms against my jeans. "You said he paused, and I swear I felt him sizing me up, like I was made of fragments he could sort through. "You said I wasn't the brother I said I'd be." I tried to find the ground, but the carpet shifted under my feet. I never said that." My voice wobbled. My hands trembled so badly the mug rattled against the saucer. My eyes flicked to the photo again, me at a recital, Mom's proud grin behind me, bitterness pooled in my chest. That photo had been taken on a day I'd lied to him, said I was rehearsing extra hard for a scholarship, but I'd actually skipped the last few practices to hang with friends. It wasn't much, but it was the lie he'd clung to. He leaned forward, fingers steepled. "You told Dad I bailed him out of jail." There it was. A bigger lie. My breath hitched. My uncle, the man I looked up to, had found a way to tear open my small untruths and paint them monstrous. My jaw locked. I could feel it, stiff and aching. The muscle in my neck twitched. My throat clenched. I pictured Dad's face when he told me Mark had bribed the officer, how he'd looked at me with betrayal, as if I'd betrayed him. Except I never said any of it. I hadn't even known that part. Something in me snapped. A dull heat pooled behind my eyes, and anger buzzed in my limbs. His gaze softened, like he'd expected me to crumble. "You always cover for him," he whispered. "You're on his side." I laughed, but it came out jagged, hollow. "That's not true." I stepped closer, jaw still locked but words spilling out. "I would never." He cut me off, that same calm voice. "Then explain why he's in hiding. Explain why he's missing." Those words hung in the stale air like shadows. My heart thudded so loud I thought he'd hear it. I staggered back. My vision narrowed, everything inside me felt like ice cracking. He stood then, looming over me, eyes black. "You want to know the truth?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folded letter. His hand shook, just a little, but that tremor said more than his words. I braced myself, palms pressed flat against my thighs, my breathing shallow. "This," he said, tossing it onto the floor. It landed at my feet, edges fluttering like wounded wings. I stared down at it. My head felt thick, like I'd run into a wall. The envelope was worn, corners curled, and half of the address was smudged, my handwriting. My pulse pounded in my ears. The room spun, and I steadied myself against the chair, fingers curling into the fabric as if it could hold me upright. Uncle Mark folded his arms, chest rising and falling, face a mask I didn't recognize. "I held my tongue," he said, voice low. "But you crossed a line." My lips parted, but no sound came. The letter crackled as if alive. I wanted to snatch it up, tear it open, but fear froze me. Everything I'd believed, about family, trust, felt like paper drenched in rain, ready to dissolve. He let out a breath, slow and deliberate, like he was savoring the moment. "Tomorrow," he whispered, and turned away. His footsteps faded down the hall, leaving me alone with that letter and my shattered reflection. My hands were shaking so badly I nearly dropped the mug. I closed my eyes, tasting the cold metal of fear. I didn't know what was inside that envelope, but I knew one thing: whatever he'd uncovered, it was only the beginning. I slipped out of bed that morning with my chest feeling tight, like I'd swallowed a stone. Every step down the hallway creaked under my weight, and I swear I heard my own heartbeat echo against the walls. I paused outside the living room, hand hovering near the doorknob, as if I could still turn back. But that letter was heavy in my pocket, edges folded and corners soft from gripping, and I knew I couldn't unhear what Uncle Mark had said. I fumbled with the envelope, fingers trembling so much the paper blurred. I tucked it into the back of my jeans and leaned against the wall, closing my eyes. My breath was shallow, and I felt sweat drip from my hairline. I could almost see Dad's face when he told me Mark was missing, how his eyes had shifted, like he was bracing for a storm. I'd never believed he could vanish, but whatever lay inside that letter felt like the first gust of wind before everything collapsed. I made it to the kitchen, flipping on the light like it might chase away the dread. Mom was at the table, coffee cup untouched, and she looked up like she'd been waiting. Her eyes were puffy, as if she'd cried in the dark. I pressed my palms to the countertop, knuckles white. Her gaze flicked to my pocket, but she didn't ask. Instead, she just exhaled, a sound full of worry. I could feel the strain in her shoulders, how they curved forward under some invisible load. I managed a quiet, "Hey." My voice cracked. She nodded once, slow and deliberate, before reaching for my hand. Her skin was cool, fingers light. "Be careful," she whispered. I nodded, though it felt like nodding might shatter me. We both stayed there, breathing in the silence, listening to the hum of the old fridge. Later, I wandered into my old room, where every poster and trinket held a memory of simpler times. I sank onto the edge of my bed, heart hammering. I pulled out the letter and let it fall open on my lap. The ink was neat, almost too neat, and my name was written across the top in my own handwriting. My jaw clenched so hard it hurt. I scanned the first line, details I didn't remember writing. A confession, except I never confessed. My cheeks heated, and I pressed both hands over my eyes, hiding from the words. But I couldn't. I read through each line, every sentence tighter than the one before, until I felt like the paper would crumble in my hands. It spoke of secrets I'd kept, but none were mine. It painted me as a traitor to those who loved me, twisting my small missteps into crimes. I felt bile rise in my throat. My breath caught, and for a moment I thought I'd be sick. My palms went damp, and I pressed the letter to my chest, feeling the thump of my heartbeat against the page. I heard a knock at the door, light but insistent. My head shot up, I smoothed my hair with shaking fingers and tucked the letter beneath my pillow. Mom peeked in. She offered me that same worried look, but this time the concern was sharper, edged with fear. "You okay?" she asked. Her voice cracked, and I saw tears glint in her eyes. I swallowed hard, voice hollow. "Yeah, I'm fine." My mouth was dry, words sticking. She hesitated, then stepped inside, closing the door softly. She curled onto the bed beside me, and I felt the mattress dip under her weight. She reached out, brushing a strand of hair behind my ear. Her hand lingered against my cheek, and I felt warmth pulse through me, even as every nerve felt raw. We sat like that, two bodies pressed together in the quiet room. I wanted to tell her everything, about Uncle Mark's calm rage, the letter filled with lies, the shame curling in my gut. But my throat felt like stone too. So I just leaned into her, head against her shoulder, and let the silence speak for both of us. A soft creak in the hallway snapped me back. Dad's footsteps. My heart lurched. Mom sat up, eyes widening. I felt the letter slide beneath the pillow. I pressed my palm over it through the fabric, as though I could hold the lies down there. Dad appeared in the doorway, face pale but eyes fierce, and for a moment I thought we'd all collide in that doorway, each of us carrying our own secrets. He opened his mouth, like he was about to say something, but then closed it. Instead, he came in and sat on the edge of the bed, a distance between us that felt both too wide and impossible to close. His hand hovered over mine, trembling. I lifted my hand so he could take it. It was like touching ice. None of us spoke. The air in that room felt thick enough to choke on. And in that silence, I realized something terrifying. The truth wasn't safe anymore. It was out there, loose and hungry, ready to tear us apart. I paced back and forth in the dim hallway, my palms pressed flat against the peeling wallpaper as if I could hold myself together that way. My heart was hammering, and every breath felt too sharp, like I'd swallowed shards of glass. I kept digging my nails into my fingertips, watching the pale skin redden, as I tried to quiet the storm in my skull. That letter, folded and forgotten beneath my pillow, was the spark that pulled all my half-truths into the open, and I felt dizzy from tracing its path in my mind. I crept into the study, where Uncle Mark used to work late, the desk lamp casting long shadows across thick ledgers and empty coffee cups. The air smelled faintly of stale paper and something metallic, like dried blood. My throat tightened. I ran a trembling finger along the edge of his desk, imagining where his hands had rested, imagining the cold weight of guilt he must have carried in every pen stroke. I flicked open the top drawer and froze when I saw a small leather-bound journal tucked inside, its spine creased from frequent use. Hands shaking so badly I could barely lift the book, I flipped it open. The pages were filled with neat, looping handwriting, entries that detailed secrets I never knew he kept. Names, dates, confessions that felt like blades carving through what was left of my calm. I touched a passage that described a night when he confronted someone he loved with a hidden truth, and I gasped aloud, wetness pooling in my eyes. My chest felt tight, like someone had wound a rope around it and was twisting. I sank onto the edge of his swivel chair, the leather groaning under me, and pressed the journal to my chest. My knees shook, and I swallowed hard, tasting metal in my mouth. I held it there for a moment, listening to my thundering pulse, before opening again to a page marked with a torn corner. I read the words, feeling each syllable land like a pebble in my stomach. He'd been investigating us, Mom, Dad, me, for weeks, maybe months. He suspected lies at every turn, distrust pulsing through every line. I slammed the journal shut, the sound echoing in the silent room. My hands flew to my mouth as guilt and rage tangled inside me, guilt that I'd lied about small things, and rage that he'd weaponized every unspoken doubt. My jaw locked, muscles stiff as stone. I could practically feel the weight of his judgment settling onto my shoulders. I slid from the chair, knees hitting the floor, and pressed my forehead against the wood, breath coming in ragged gasps. I forced myself up and fled the room, clutching the journal like evidence in a crime drama I never auditioned for. I found Mom in the kitchen, clutching the cold mug of tea she'd forgotten to sip. She looked up, eyes wide and startled, as if she'd been bracing for the worst but hoped it wouldn't come. I shoved the journal toward her. "Read this," I croaked, voice cracking. My throat burned, and tears rolled down my cheeks without shame. She took it with trembling fingers, flipping through pages as I watched her face contort, fear, sorrow, confusion, all playing across her features. Her lips parted but no sound came. She clutched my hand, and her veins stood out against her skin, heavy and blue. "He's been following us," she whispered, voice small, as if the words hurt to say. My stomach clenched, and I pressed my palm to mine, feeling the heat of her panic. We stood there, locked together, two bodies trembling in the fading light. The kitchen clock ticked loudly above us, each second stretching into an eternity. My chest tightened again, and I bit my lips so hard I tasted blood. In that moment, I realized I was out of time, like the calm before a storm that never arrives, but you know it's coming. I slid out of her grip and backed away, jaw locked, body shutting down. "He's going to tear us apart," I whispered, voice hollow. Mom's hand hovered in the air a moment before dropping to her side. Her shoulders shook with silent sobs, and I felt that same ache in my own chest. I turned and ran up the stairs, leaving the journal on the kitchen counter, its secret still sizzling in the air. At the top of the stairs, I pressed my back to the banister, breathing hard enough to see my breath cloud the hallway. My hands were slick with sweat, and I felt hollow in the center, like someone had scooped out my insides. The walls seemed to lean in, closing off the path forward. And in that tight corridor, with the house creaking around me, I realized something fierce and terrible. I needed to fight back. Because if I didn't, Uncle Mark's truth would become my cage, and there'd be no way out. I stood in the hallway, chest tightening so hard I thought I'd collapse. Dad's hand rested on the banister above me, knuckles white. He stared down, eyes unreadable, as if searching my face for answers. I swallowed, jaw locked, feeling the taste of fear and adrenaline in my mouth. My footsteps felt too loud as I stepped forward, and my shirt stuck to my back with sweat. Dad breathed in, slow and deliberate. "We need to find him," he said. The words came out low, emotion rough at the edges. I conceded with a nod, though my throat felt scraped raw. He lifted his gaze to the ceiling, shoulders hunching as if the weight of everything pressed down on him. I recognized that posture. It was the same tired slump I'd seen in his eyes on the day he realized Mark was gone. We moved together toward the front door, each step punctuated by my racing heartbeat. Mom appeared in the living room doorway, hair mussed, face etched with exhaustion. She held a flashlight, the beam cutting through dust and dim light. Her voice quivered when she spoke, "Be careful." I met her gaze, and for a fraction of a second, I saw her fear mirrored in my own eyes. I nodded, though my legs felt weak. Dad unlocked the door. The porch light flickered on, spilling yellow onto the worn welcome mat. I stepped outside, the night air cold against my skin, every hair on my arm standing up. I could hear crickets chirping, distant cars humming, and in that quiet, it felt like the world was watching. I glanced at Dad, his face was set, jaw clenched, eyes searching the darkness beyond the yard. I reached into my jacket and felt the journal's spine pressed against my ribs. The pages threatened to spill every secret I'd kept, secrets he'd turned into weapons. Dad turned to me. "Are you sure?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. His fingers grazed mine for a moment, a touch so light I wasn't sure it happened. Then he stepped forward, and I found myself following, as though his resolve pulled me along. We climbed into his old sedan, and I sank into the back seat, legs stiff and hands clammy. Dad eased into the driver's side and didn't start the engine right away. Instead, he stared out through the windshield, hands gripping the wheel. I unfolded the journal, bending low so Dad wouldn't see. Each line of ink threatened to rewrite our reality. I traced a passage about how he suspected I'd hidden something crucial, how he promised himself he'd uncover it, no matter the cost. My eyes pricked with tears, anger, and guilt coiling in my stomach. I slammed the journal shut, the leather edge pressing into my palm. My breath gusted out, hard enough to fog the window. Dad turned the key, and the engine rumbled to life. The headlights cut a path through the night as he eased the car onto the road. I stared out the rear window at the house, lights glowing through curtains, like watchful eyes. My heart ached, and my throat tightened. I realized this drive might change everything, that every lie and every truth would be laid bare soon enough. We drove in silence, the road winding between trees that loomed overhead. My mind raced. What would happen when we found Uncle Mark? Would he welcome us, or would he see us as enemies? I clenched the journal on my lap, nails digging through the leather, and felt tears burn behind my eyes. My jaw locked, and I swallowed down the lump in my throat. Dad glanced at me once, his eyes soft for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice cracked, and I sensed he was apologizing for more than just this night. My chest twisted, tears slipping down my cheeks. I tried to find words but nothing came. Instead, I reached out and placed my hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension in his muscles. He squeezed my hand back, and I knew we were tied together by fear and hope both. We were setting out to find the man who'd exposed our secrets, but what we'd find might expose more. As we rounded a bend in the road, headlights caught a sign for a small town ahead. In that moment, my resolve hardened. I would face whatever came, with truth or lies in hand, because some things demanded reckoning. And I'd fight to protect the fragments left of our family, even if it meant confronting the mirror Mark had held up to us. I gripped the journal so tight my knuckles turned white, the leather edges biting into my palm. The car hummed over rough pavement, and I could feel each bump in my ribs, like memory fragments jolting loose. Dad's hands were steady on the wheel, but I sensed him glancing over, worry creasing his brow. Every time I met his gaze, my chest clenched, and I forced down a hiccup of panic. The road stretched out like a dark ribbon, trees arching overhead and throttling out the sky. My breath was shallow, and I kept wiping sweat from my forehead, even though the night air was cold. I shifted in my seat, joints stiff, as though the car had become a cage. I wanted to lean forward, throw open the door, and run back to the house where everything, lies or truth, felt safer somehow. Dad cleared his throat. "Do you think he knows we're coming?" His voice was low, but it shattered the tight bubble of silence. I swallowed, jaw aching. "I don't know," I admitted. My words tasted like metal. "He's always been one step ahead." I glanced down at the journal, imagining his eyes scanning those same words, mocking me for every secret I'd buried. A gust of wind rattled the driver's side window, and I flinched. My heart pounded as I pictured Uncle Mark leaning over his desk, reading my life like an open book. And I wondered, would he feel pity, or would he see me as the villain in his story? Dad flicked on a signal and turned onto a side road, headlights slicing through mist. I pressed my hand to the glass, fingertips cool, and watched the fog swirl around the beams. My mouth went dry. I pictured that Polaroid he'd left behind, the one with Dad's face half hidden behind a smile, and I felt a stab of guilt. That photo had been our happy moment, but even then, something had felt off. I closed my eyes against the memory, my jaw locked so tight I could taste blood. We crested a small rise, and the town lights came into view, faint glimmers against the night's canvas. I leaned forward, chest tightening so badly I had to inhale in jerks. The houses looked empty, windows dark. I felt like we were driving into the belly of something ominous, the way the silence pressed in on all sides. Dad glanced at me again. "Whatever happens," he said, voice rough, "we stick together." His words should have comforted me, but they only amplified the dread. I nodded, even though my throat felt like sandpaper. He reached over and squeezed my shoulder, gentle, but firm. I felt tears prick behind my eyes, and I swallowed them down with a wet swallow. The car slowed as we entered the town center. A single street lamp flickered outside what looked like a shuttered diner. We parked, engine ticking softly as it cooled. Dad cut the lights, and we sat in darkness, the only sound my ragged breath. I unbuttoned my jacket and fished the journal from my shirt pocket. The pages rustled in the silence, and I thought I'd gone deaf, like every noise had been swallowed whole. I opened to a page marked by a scrap of paper. The ink described a confrontation Uncle Mark had staged in that very diner years ago, when he caught someone he trusted in a lie. The words were vivid, how he'd waited in the corner booth, how his hands had trembled around his coffee cup, how he'd watched the other person's face go pale. I felt those same tremors shake through my limbs now. My jaw locked, and I closed my eyes, pressing the journal to my chest as if I could absorb his memory. Dad cleared his throat again. I looked up to find him holding a flashlight, its beam sweeping across the car's interior before shining through the windshield. "We should go in," he said. His voice was steady, but I saw the tremor in his jaw. I reached back to grab my bag, hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I tucked the journal inside, zipper clicking shut. I stepped out onto gravel, the cold biting my ankles. Dad joined me, and together we walked toward the diner's door. Each step echoed, and I felt every muscle in my legs protest. The porch light above the door flickered once, twice, and then grew steady, like a heartbeat settling into rhythm. My chest tightened around that beat, and I realized, whatever waited inside, it wouldn't just reveal Uncle Mark's secrets. It would uncover all of ours. And I was terrified, yet strangely relieved, that the reckoning had finally come. I climbed into the passenger seat, the car door rattling as I closed it, and my hands flew to my face, pressing against my cheeks as though I could scrub away the ache. The engine's tick settled into a dull rumble, and Dad eased us onto the road, tires crunching over gravel. My chest felt hollow, each breath slipping through me like water. I stared out the window at the diner's neon sign, its glow fading behind us, and I swallowed a hard lump in my throat. Outside, the night air had turned colder, and I could feel ice crawling along my skin. I wrapped my arms around myself, jaw locked in exhaustion, while Dad shot me a glance in the rearview mirror, his eyes full of a silent question. I forced my shoulders to relax, but every muscle stayed taut as a drawn bow. My palms were slick against the seat, and I pressed them flat, chasing away the tremor. We drove in heavy silence, the world narrowed to dark trees and the car's interior light flickering overhead. My mind replayed Mark's departure, the way he turned his back without a backward look, the echo of that final scrape as his chair slid away. A low hollow just beneath my sternum throbbed, and I bit my lip until it bled, tasting iron on my tongue. Dad cleared his throat and shifted in his seat. "We need a plan," he said, voice coarse. The words scraped against me, stirring a fresh wave of dread. I glanced at him, chest tightening. "We can't just chase him down," I whispered. My voice felt raw, frayed like old rope. "He knows all our secrets. He could set more traps." Dad nodded slowly, jaw clenched so tight I could see the strain in his neck. His grip on the wheel was white-knuckled, a silent confession of fear. "I know," he said. "But we can't leave things like this." His gaze flicked to me again, softening for a moment. "You okay?" he asked. His tone was gentle, but I heard the tremor in his words, just enough to send a shiver through me. I pressed my tongue against the roof of my mouth, trying to swallow down the panic bubbling in my chest. The car's heat felt stifling all of a sudden, and I cracked the window a fraction, letting cold air nip at my lungs. It burned, but it was a reminder I was alive. I inhaled deep, letting the sting clear my head. That night in the diner. "I saw him," I said, and my voice wavered. My fingers twined together in my lap, nails digging into my palms. He looked defeated, somehow. But there was something else, like he was testing us. I paused, chest heaving, heart hammering so loud I thought Dad would hear it. "I think he wanted us to follow." Dad exhaled sharply, turning onto a quieter road. The headlights cut through fog that seemed to gather against the windshield, swirling in ghostly tendrils. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead against the glass, tracing shapes in the mist. My heart felt like a stone in my gut, weighty and immovable. "He's playing a game," I continued, voice tight. "We need to figure out the rules." I turned back to him, eyes stinging. "He exposed my lies, Dad. But maybe he wants to push further, see how far we'll go." I clenched a fist against my chest, feeling the press of fabric and bone. "I don't want to lose us." Dad's hand reached across the console, brushing mine. His skin was warm, fingers trembling. I felt a jolt of something, comfort, fear, resolve, coiled together inside me. He said nothing, but his grip tightened, and I knew we were bound in this, however fragile. We drove on, past shuttered shops and silent homes, the town behind us slipping into darkness. The road curved, leading us toward the highway that cut back to our neighborhood. Each mile felt heavy, dragging out the night, and I pressed my face against the seat, wishing I could press the world flat and smooth again. Somewhere between exhaustion and dread, a plan began to take shape. I pictured Uncle Mark's study, the way he'd hidden the key to his secrets in plain sight. I imagined retracing his steps, following the trail of that leather journal, that torn photograph. If he thought he could corner us in his game, I'd turn the tables. I'd expose what he tried to bury, his own guilt, his own fears. My jaw unclenched just a fraction, and I let out a long, shaky breath. The car's hum steadied, and the night air settled into the cabin like a promise. Dad flicked off the highway and turned onto the familiar street. The glow of porch lights appeared ahead, warm and inviting, a fragile beacon against all the uncertainty. I sat up straight, heart still pounding, body trembling but determined. The reckoning wasn't over, I could feel its weight in every beat of my heart. But I wasn't just a victim of the truth he'd thrown at us. I was ready to fight back. And when we drove under our street lamp and toward home, I knew the next steps would define us all. Later, When Dad finally parked under the glow of our porch light, I sat motionless in the passenger seat, staring at the dashboard as if it held all the answers. My hands were still trembling, and I could feel sweat drying on my forehead. Dad killed the engine and turned to me. "You good?" he asked, voice heavy with everything unsaid. I swallowed, jaw tight. "I need to know more," I whispered. We stepped out into the cool air. Night insects buzzed around the porch, and the distant hum of traffic felt like a curtain between us and the world. Mom was waiting on the steps, arms wrapped around herself. When she saw us, relief and fear collided on her face. She hurried forward and took my hand. Her skin was cold, and I squeezed back. Inside, the house felt alien. Every creak of the floorboards under our feet seemed to echo Uncle Mark's absence. I pulled the journal from my coat pocket, its weight a reminder that his secrets were still alive. I flipped it open to the first page, and Mom peered over my shoulder. She gasped softly, fingertips brushing the worn leather. "I can't believe he wrote this," she said. Dad closed the door behind him, leaning against it. His eyes were dark under his hairline, and I noticed his knuckles were white from gripping the handle. We gathered in the living room, the lamp above throwing soft pools of light. I sat on the couch, journal on my lap, while Mom perched on the armrest and Dad sank into the armchair. Silence stretched, heavy and jagged. Finally, Dad cleared his throat. "He's been tracking us," he said. "Watching our habits, our mistakes." He rubbed his face, and I saw the lines deepen. "We need to go through everything he left behind." His gaze shifted to me. "Are you okay handling this?" I clenched my fists. "I have to," I said, feeling both fear and an odd kind of relief. The panic that had strangled me all night seemed to loosen its grip. It was like breathing underwater and finally reaching the surface. My chest ached, but I felt a spark of resolve. Mom stood and retrieved my laptop from the kitchen table. "Maybe he left digital files," she suggested. Her voice wavered, guilt and hope tangled together. She plugged it in and booted it up. The screen's glow reflected in her eyes, and I could see her shaking. I sat next to her, heart pounding, as the login screen asked for a password. Dad crossed to my desk and rummaged through the drawers. He found a USB stick taped to the underside of the desktop. My chest pinched, and I felt bile rise. I took it with shaking hands and plugged it into the laptop. Folders popped up, one labeled Family, another Confession, and a third marked only with an underscore. I hesitated, fingers hovering over the keys. "Which one?" Mom asked softly. I exhaled, tasting the metallic tang of dread. "Family," I said, and clicked it open. A list of audio files appeared, each named after our family members. Dad's file was first. His jaw tightened. I clicked Dad's file. A recording began with Mark's voice, slow, measured, close. I pressed my hand to my mouth, heart pounding. He spoke of trust broken and promises withheld. Each sentence felt like a jab to my chest. Mom covered her mouth, eyes wide. Dad's face went pale. When the last word ended, silence pressed in. The laptop fan whirred, and I could hear my own breath. Mom reached for a tissue, and Dad ran a hand through his hair. I closed the file and stared at the screen, mind racing. "I think I know what we need to do next," I said, voice trembling but firm. My jaw unclenched slightly, and I could taste tears. "We go to his house. We find everything, files, photos, messages, and we decide which truths we can live with." Mom nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. Dad stood and held out his hand. I took it, feeling strength flow through his grip. We were united by fear, betrayal, and a need for answers. Outside, the night remained still, but inside me a storm was building. We had crossed a threshold, and there was no turning back. I pushed open the diner door, the bell chiming softly as I stepped inside. The vinyl booths were empty, and the overhead lights hummed in the quiet. A faint haze hung in the air, stale coffee and old vinyl, and the polished counter reflected my pale face. I felt my jaw lock as I looked around, every muscle tensing. My palms were slick, and I pressed them against my thighs to still the tremors. Dad followed behind, flashlight rolled off to his side like a silent promise. His shoulders were tight, and I could hear him swallow against the silence. We moved toward the back, where the booths cast long shadows. The place looked abandoned, except for one movement near the back window. I paused, heart pounding, and peered across the checkerboard floor. There was a figure hunched over a table, head bowed. The leather jacket threw shadows across their back, but I knew that stance, stiff, rigid, wary. My breath caught, chest compressing so hard I thought I might pass out. I swallowed, tasting metal. I felt weight behind my eyes and blinked fast to push the tears away. I took a hesitant step forward. My knee hit the floor as I stumbled over a loose tile, and I pressed my palms into the cold surface, jaw still locked. I heard Dad catch me, steadying my arm. "Here," he whispered, voice low and rough. I nodded, relief and guilt twisting in my chest. I pushed up, the journal zipped tight in my coat pocket. Uncle Mark's head lifted, and he looked up. His eyes, dark, sharp, fell on me. In that instant, the world tilted. I could see the flicker of surprise, then a mask of control sliding back into place. He straightened, folding his hands on the table. The old diner clock ticked overhead, every second stretching thinner than the next. I swallowed again. My throat ached. "You're here," I said, voice barely more than a breath. Uncle Mark nodded, his gaze drifting to Dad. He leaned back, chair scraping against the floor. The scrape echoed, slicing through my haze of fear. Dad stepped forward. "We need answers," he said. His voice wavered, like he was balancing on a knife's edge. He glanced at me, then back at Mark. "Why did you write those things?" Mark's hands remained folded, fingers tapping a steady rhythm. The shadows under his eyes looked deep. He leaned forward, voice calm. "Because the truth matters," he said. He paused, letting those words settle. I felt the heat crawl up my neck, then lightning of rage crack through my chest. I clenched my fists. My nails dug into my palms and I tasted blood. "You lied about me," I hissed. Heat burned my cheeks. "You put lies in that letter." He tilted his head, expression flat. "I didn't lie. I exposed what was hidden." Dad's jaw twitched. "What were you hiding?" he demanded. Mark's eyes flicked to me, then rested on me with something like pity. "You and your father. Both of you held secrets. I gave them form, so they couldn't fester." Anger and betrayal coiled inside me. I took a step forward, body trembling. My breath came in sharp bursts, and I pressed a hand to my chest. "You tortured us," I managed. "You used our pain for your sense of justice." He unfolded his hands slowly. "I was protecting you," he snapped, voice taut. "You refused to see what you were becoming." Pain ignited in my chest, each word a knife. My shoulders slumped, tears pricking at my lashes. The air felt too thin. Dad's face softened as he reached for my hand. Mark rose then, chair scraping again. He looked at us, eyes cold. "I can't be part of this any longer," he said, voice steady. He turned and walked toward the door without another glance. I watched him go, his silhouette halting in the doorway before he disappeared into the night. My jaw went slack, and I sank onto the nearest booth. The vinyl was sticky beneath my palms, and I felt every tremor that shook my limbs. Dad crouched beside me, hand on my shoulder. "Are you okay?" he whispered. I shook my head, too stunned to speak. My heart pounded so hard I could feel it in my temples. The diner felt empty again, echoes of confrontation hanging in the stale air. I pressed my forehead against the table, eyes closing against the flood of emotion, fear, pity, rage, sorrow, all colliding inside me. After a long moment, I lifted my head. My cheeks were wet, and my jaw was locked in exhaustion. I cleared my throat, voice raw. "We need to go home," I said. Dad nodded and helped me to my feet. We left the diner behind, its neon sign flickering off into silence. I eased into the back seat of Dad's car, the vinyl cold against my palms as I slid in. The engine's rumble felt too loud in the tense quiet, like a drumbeat echoing inside my skull. I pressed my shoulder into the seat back, trying to steady the tremor rippling through my arms. The diner's neon sign had vanished behind us, but its buzzing glow still flickered behind my eyes. Dad shifted in the driver's seat. His hands gripped the wheel so tightly the knuckles shone white. I watched his jaw work as he exhaled, the flap of his Adam's apple catching in the lamplight. He didn't speak. I traced a fingertip along the cool metal of the door handle, wishing I could press words into the space between us. The road stretched ahead, wet from an earlier rain, reflecting street lamps like molten gold. I leaned forward, pressing my forehead against the glass. My breath steamed the window, and I swept a hand across it, watching droplets streak downward. Each one felt like a memory dragging itself back to the surface, every lie I'd told, every doubt Uncle Mark had unearthed. A car passed us in the other lane, headlights flaring. I flinched as the light brushed across my eyes, heart stuttering. My throat tightened, and I swallowed, tasting copper. My jaw locked, muscles stiff so I could barely turn my head to meet Dad's glance in the rearview mirror. He looked tired, eyes shadowed, cheeks hollowed, but there was a flicker of resolve there, too, like a candle fighting wind. "Do you think he expected us to come here?" I finally asked, voice barely above a whisper. My words felt foreign in my mouth, coated with dread and curiosity. Dad's response was slow. "I think he wanted to see how far we'd go," he said. His tone was flat but edged with hurt. I could feel the weight of his words settle in my chest, coiling around my ribs like cold wire. I closed my eyes against the passing lights, head resting against the window. My chest constricted, and I pressed both hands over my heart, trying to calm the pounding. The leather notebook in my bag thumped against my leg, a steady reminder of the truths we'd gathered. I squeezed my eyes shut, feeling tears pool at the corners, but I blinked them back. Not yet. We drove on, the town falling silent around us. The hum of the tires over asphalt soothed me, lulling the raw tension beneath my skin. My arms loosened, and I let one hand slip down to rest on my lap. The other slid to my mouth, thumb brushing my lower lip, tracing its tremble. My mouth was dry, tongue swollen, a reminder of how close I'd come to breaking in front of Uncle Mark. Dad flicked on his blinker and turned onto a quieter street. Rows of dark houses stood against the sky, windows shuttered. I felt the car slow, and I straightened, jaw unclenching. The hum shifted to a stop, engine ticking as it cooled. We sat in that small space of silence, the air thick with unspoken thoughts. I leaned forward and opened my bag, pulling out the leather notebook. Its cover was worn, edges softened by countless turns. I placed it on the seat between us. "We need a plan," I said, voice steadier now that the car had stopped. My fingers curled around the notebook's spine. "I can't let him control us with his secrets." Dad turned off the ignition and reached over, brushing my hand. His touch was firm, grounding. "We'll figure it out together," he promised. His eyes held mine, steady and sure, and I felt the tension in my chest loosen for the first time since that confrontation. I closed the notebook and tucked it back into the bag. My shoulders dropped, and I let out a breath that had been trapped in my lungs. The scent of rain and asphalt drifted in through the open window, cool against my face. I wiped my palm on my jeans and opened the door. Outside, the night air was sharp and fresh. I stepped onto the pavement, feeling its uneven texture through my sneakers. The street lamp above flickered, casting long shadows behind me. I turned to Dad, who climbed out beside me, and we walked toward home in tandem, each step more certain than the last. As we approached our porch, I felt the knot in my chest unwind into something like hope. The house's warm glow spilled onto the lawn, a promise of safety and new beginnings. I paused at the steps, inhaled deep, and let the night's weight fall away. I stepped out of Uncle Mark's house before dawn, the sky a pale wash of gray, and felt the day's first light press against my shoulders like a promise. Dad and Mom followed close, each of us carrying the canvas bag of revealed secrets. The air smelled of dew on grass and the distant hum of morning traffic, ordinary sounds that felt surreal after the night's revelations. We paused on the front lawn. The windows behind us were dark, and for a moment I wondered if Mark had watched us leave, his silhouette framed in the window's sliver of light. My chest tightened with regret and relief tangled together. Dad broke the silence. "What now?" he asked, voice low. I unzipped the bag and held the leather notebook in my hands, its cover soft with age and use. The envelopes inside were empty, their truths read and laid bare. I touched the spine, feeling the creases where Mark had flipped pages in his search for honesty. My jaw unclenched and I closed my eyes, breathing in the morning air. "We start by forgiving," I said, voice quiet but sure. "Not because everything's okay, but because we need to heal." Mom reached for my hand, squeezing it. She looked at the bag, then back at Dad. "We forgive him, and ourselves." Her words trembled, but they held a firmness that steadied me. I nodded and slipped the notebook under my arm. The walk to our car felt different. The grass beneath our feet was slick, leaving damp footprints on Dad's shoes. Each step sounded loud in my ears, a drumbeat marking the transition from night's chaos to day's clarity. I glanced at Dad's profile in the soft light, his usual fatigue replaced by a cautious hope. Mom walked beside me, her posture straighter, shoulders squared with determination. We reached the driveway. Dad set the bag on the trunk and opened the back door. I slid inside and placed the notebook on my lap. Mom joined me, pulling the canvas bag onto her knees, her fingers brushing over the notebooks and photos as though they were fragile relics. Dad circled to the driver's side, and I watched him fold into the seat, reaching for the keys. When he started the engine, the car's vibrations seemed to shake away the remnants of night's tension. We drove in silence, the suburban streets waking around us, mail trucks rattling, joggers pounding the pavement, sprinklers hissing. The world felt unaware of the upheaval we carried in our bag, the unquiet truths now safely contained. We turned onto our street, and I felt a familiar swell of comfort. Our house stood at the end of the block, lights glowing in upstairs windows. I remembered our family's laughter echoing in these rooms before suspicion crept in. My heart thumped, heavy and hopeful. I tucked the notebook under my coat, close to my heart, and leaned back against the seat. Dad pulled into the driveway, and Mom exhaled softly. We climbed out together and walked up the steps in unison, the weight of our discoveries both heavy in our hands and light in our souls. I stopped at the front door, glancing back at the car full of evidence and apology. The notebook's leather cover pressed against my side, solid proof that Mark's final act had been one of care, not cruelty. Inside, the house felt warmer than I remembered. The living room rug still bore the fingerprints of our late-night sorting, but now it felt less like the stage of a family trial and more like the foundation of a new beginning. Mom set the canvas bag on the coffee table, and I placed the notebook beside it, then sat on the couch. Dad sank into the armchair, rubbing his temples. "Should we talk?" I asked, voice soft. Mom sat next to me, and Dad leaned forward, elbows on his knees. Silence settled, but it was gentle, no longer suffocating. I opened the notebook to the page where Mark had explained his motives, tears welling as I read aloud. "I hope to protect you from shadows you couldn't see, though I went about it all wrong." As I spoke, my hands shook, and Dad closed his eyes, nodding. Mom wiped her cheeks, letting her tears fall without shame. The three of us sat together, unified by loss, guilt, and a shared desire for reconciliation. When I finished reading, I closed the notebook and met their eyes. "I think he wanted us to face the truth, painful as it was," I said. "Now we can choose how to live with it." My voice trembled, but the words felt strong in my mouth. Dad exhaled, shoulders slumping in relief. "We'll carry these memories," he said, voice thick, "but we'll make new ones, ones built on honesty." Mom leaned her head on my shoulder. "We'll forgive him and ourselves," she whispered. I nodded, feeling the tension in my chest melt into warmth. The air in the room felt lighter, as though the ghosts of unspoken secrets had been laid to rest. We clasped hands, 3 hearts linked in acceptance and hope. In that quiet morning light, I knew the reckoning was over, but the healing was just beginning. And together, we'd face whatever came next, unafraid of the truths we carried. I hovered in the driveway of Uncle Mark's house, the gravel crunching under my sneakers like whispered warnings. Dad stood behind me, flashlight in hand, shoulders hunched against a breeze I couldn't feel. The porch light was out, and the windows were dark except for a sliver of moonlight slipping through blinds. My chest felt like it had been replaced with stone, every inhale testing its cracks. I pressed my palms to my thighs, fingertips chalky with sweat. We moved to the front door. Dad's hand hovered at the knob, as if touching it might trigger some trap. I swallowed, tasting fear and anticipation, and reached out, fingers trembling so badly I nearly missed the latch. The door creaked open, and stale air spilled out, carrying dust and the faint tang of old paper. My jaw locked at the sound, muscles stiff as boards. I could hear my own heartbeat, and for a moment I thought it would announce us to the darkness. Inside, the house was silent. The living room felt like a mausoleum, faded upholstery, family photos coated in dust. I gripped the journal in my coat pocket, its leather spine digging into my ribs. Dad raised the flashlight, beam oscillating over a cracked mirror, over toppled lamps and a threadbare rug. My shoulders pitched forward, chest compressing under the weight of every step. We crept through the hallway, floorboard groaning under our weight. My mouth went dry, and I forced myself not to gasp each time a floorboard protested. Every shadow seemed to shift, like someone lurking just beyond the beam. I pressed my back against the wall, tracing splinters with my fingertips to steady myself. The air smelled of mildew and old coffee cups packed in a box on a side table, dried ground still clinging to rims. "Here," Dad whispered, pointing to a door cracked open at the end of the hall. My legs felt leaden, but I followed him, breath shallow. He nudged the door with his flashlight. It swung inward with a soft squeal. The room looked like an office, bookshelves lining walls, a desk piled with papers, an old desktop computer draped in a sheet. My heart thundered as I stepped inside, sweeping the flashlight over yellowing envelopes, scattered photographs, sticky notes plastered on the wall. I exhaled without meaning to, and Dad shushed me. I sank to my knees by a low cabinet and pulled open a drawer. It was empty, but I could feel the promise of secrets. I pressed my palm to the wood, willing myself to calm down. Dad knelt beside me, and together we rifled through papers, bank statements, torn notebook pages, maps with routes circled in red. My stomach churned, each sheet felt like a new betrayal. I bit the inside of my lip until it stung. At the far corner of the desk, I spotted a locked box. Its brass latch was tarnished, and I could see the edges were worn smooth from use. My breath caught. Dad found a small screwdriver in a nearby toolbox and handed it to me. I felt the tool tremble in my hand, like it knew it was about to unlock something dangerous. My jaw went slack. I slid the tip under the latch and gently pried. It popped open with a quiet click. Inside was a stack of envelopes tied with twine and a small leather-bound notebook, older than the journal, its pages yellowed. I lifted the top envelope, heart hammering, and read the label in Uncle Mark's handwriting, "For Lena, if things go wrong." My chest constricted, and I closed my eyes for a moment, resting my forehead against the edge of the cabinet. My hands were ice. I untied the string and peeled open the first envelope. Inside was a photograph, me as a child, standing beside Uncle Mark at a family picnic. We were both laughing, arms around each other. I felt a pang of nostalgia so sharp it almost dug into my ribs. The back was scrawled, "Never forget who you are." My throat clenched, and I pressed my fingers to my mouth to keep from crying. Dad cleared his throat. I looked up to see him holding the notebook. He offered it to me, eyes soft but serious. My fingers closed around its spine, and I opened to the first page. There, in neat script, was a note addressed to me, an explanation for why he'd hidden everything, an apology for the pain he'd caused, and a promise that the truth, however ugly, was meant to set us free. My breath hitched, and tears blurred the words. I looked at Dad, voice catching. He cared, I whispered. My jaw unfroze, and I could feel the tension draining out of my muscles. The anger and fear were still there, but beneath them was something else, understanding. Uncle Mark hadn't been punishing us for punishment's sake. He'd been driven by his own guilt, his own need to protect, even if it hurt. I closed the notebook and wiped my eyes. Dad nodded, and we shared a moment of silent solidarity. The room felt warmer, as if the dust and silence had been lifted. I slid the envelopes back in, untied and then retied the twine, careful, respectful of the secrets they held. We stood together, looking at the opened box. "We'll finish taking everything," Dad said softly. His hand rested on my shoulder, firm and grounding. I nodded, feeling strength rise in my chest, cold replaced by purpose. We turned off the flashlight and left the office, stepping over the threshold of reckoning, and stepping closer to healing. I stayed beside the doorway as Dad gathered the last envelopes and the leather notebook, feeling every muscle in my legs shake like loose wires. The office door clicked softly as he closed it, and I could hear the faint hum of the old wiring in the walls settling around us. My chest tightened, an ache that felt almost protective, while my palms leaked sweat against the canvas bag Dad slung over his shoulder. We moved down the hall in silence, steps muted by the fraying carpet. Every so often, I'd pause and let my fingertips trace the wallpaper's embossed pattern, grounding myself in its rough texture. Each press of my nails into the fiber reminded me I was still here, still breathing, still fighting. In the living room, Mom sat on the edge of the couch, knees tucked under her chin. Her eyes were red, and she flinched when we entered, as though expecting us to carry only more pain. But Dad set the bag gently on the coffee table, and I saw her exhale, slow relief curling through her. "Let's spread them out," I whispered, voice still tight with echoing footsteps. Dad nodded, and together we arranged the envelopes on the table like a deck of secrets. Their string was gone now, and they lay open in a ragged fan, each one waiting. Mom reached for the first envelope, labeled "Family," in Mark's neat script, and held it with both hands, thumb brushing a small tear in the paper. "He documented everything," she murmured, voice trembling. Her words settled over me like dust motes in a beam of light. I opened the envelope and pulled out another photograph, Dad hugging me as I blew out birthday candles. But behind us, on the mantel in the picture, was a small, framed wedding photo of Mark and Aunt Claire, one I'd never noticed before. My throat sprang tight, I pressed a fist to my mouth and swallowed hard, feeling tears pool at the back of my throat. Dad tapped the next envelope, "Mom," and Mom glanced up at him, uncertainty flickering in her gaze. She opened it and found a series of typed pages detailing conversations she'd had with Mark late at night, her voice waxing and waning with regret and hope. As she read, her shoulders shook, and I crouched beside her, wrapping an arm around her trembling frame. Her tears were warm against my arm, and I felt my own cheeks grow damp. We worked through each envelope slowly, childhood memories, school report cards, credit card statements showing payments Mark had covered anonymously. With every reveal, I felt a mix of guilt and gratitude twist inside me, guilt for having suspected him, and gratitude for the quiet support he'd left behind. By the time we reached the notebook, the room was heavy with unsaid words. Dad picked it up reverently, running a thumb along its worn cover. "Should I read it?" he asked, voice low. I nodded, though my throat felt raw. He opened the cover and began to read aloud. "Lena, if you're seeing this, then my methods have fractured our trust." His voice cracked on my name, and I felt warmth pool in my chest. Tears slipped down my cheeks as we listened to his admission of guilt and apology for the pain his scrutiny had caused. When he finished, silence settled over us again, this time softer, threaded with something like forgiveness. I exhaled slowly, the first full breath I'd taken in hours, and said, "He did it all because he loved us." My jaw unclenched, the tension melting away in slow rivulets. Mom stood and walked to me, pulling me into a hug so tight my ribs ached. Dad joined us, one hand on each of our shoulders, and I felt their collective warmth chase away the night's chill. In that embrace, the broken threads of our family felt like they might stitch themselves back together. I stepped back and looked at the table of secrets. The envelopes were empty now, their truths laid bare. I ran my hand over the polished wood and whispered, "We keep these. We remember." Dad nodded, eyes wet but steady. Together, we gathered the papers, photos, and notebook, placing them carefully back into the canvas bag. The weight felt different now, no longer a burden, but a reminder of how far we'd come. As we turned off the lamp and left the study behind, I felt the echo of Mark's final words in my heart: the truth, however painful, could set us free. I found myself standing at the edge of the garden path, dew soaking into my sneakers as I watched Dad close the trunk of his car. The moon hadn't fully faded, but the first pale light of morning seeped into the sky, soft and hesitant. My chest felt heavy, like each breath had to work its way through a tangle of threads, but a quiet resolve pulsed beneath the tightness. I brushed damp hair from my forehead and tucked the leather notebook deeper under my arm. Mom joined me on the grass, the canvas bag slung over her shoulder. Her shoulders sagged, exhaustion still clinging, but her eyes held something new, clarity laced with gentle hope. She took my hand, her fingers cool against mine. "We did it," she whispered, voice hushed so the house wouldn't stir. I nodded, jaw unclenching for the first time in days, and let that simple truth settle in my bones. Together, we walked up the stone steps, each one familiar yet transformed by the weight we'd carried through the night. The front door creaked open before we reached it. Dad must have unlocked from inside. He stood in the hallway, flashlight in hand, though the beam was off. His face was pale, but relief softened his features. He stepped aside, and we moved past him into the still warm living room, the couch cushions indented where we'd sorted secrets. I sank onto the edge of the couch, the leather cool beneath me. Mom placed the canvas bag on the coffee table, and Dad set the notebook beside it. Silence spread, but it felt gentle, not oppressive. I clenched my hands in my lap, feeling the slow tick of my pulse in my fingertips, and closed my eyes for a moment, just to make sure I could. When I opened them, Dad was kneeling by the coffee table, eyes on the notebook's worn cover. He picked it up reverently, fingers brushing the leather as though touching a fragile artifact. I watched as he opened to a blank page at the end. "Do you want to write something here?" he asked softly. My breath caught. The invitation to add my own words, my own truth, felt both terrifying and liberating. I swallowed, tongue thick. I think so," I said, voice trembling. I reached out, fingertips grazing the notebook's edge before closing the page. My hand shook, and I pressed the notebook back to my chest, jaw still locked until I felt the tremors ease. The air in the room felt warmer, charged with possibility. Mom moved beside me and sat on the couch arm, her hand resting on my knee. "You've carried so much," she said. "This is your space now." The words were gentle encouragement, and I felt tears sting my eyes, tears of relief, of gratitude, of something I couldn't name. I let them fall, pressing a hand to my mouth to stifle the soft sob. Dad pulled a pen from his pocket and handed it to me. I took it, the metal cool between my fingers. I watched the lines on the couch's leather arm ripple under my grip and marshaled my thoughts, the fear, the anger, the guilt, and finally the forgiveness. I cleared my throat, lips dry, and set pen to paper. I wrote slowly, each word heavy with meaning, an apology for the doubts I'd harbored, gratitude for the truth that had cut me free, and a promise to carry honesty rather than fear into our future. I felt my chest expand with each sentence, as though I was breathing air for the first time after being underwater. My hands stilled, and I read over the words, simple sentences, but they felt like anchors. Mom reached over and pressed her cheek to my shoulder, warm and reassuring. Dad knelt behind us, hands resting on the couch back, watching. I closed the notebook, tapping the cover twice before lifting it into my lap. I looked at them, voice steady now. "No more secrets," I said. "From all of us." Dad nodded, his head tipping forward until his forehead brushed mine. Mom exhaled, a soft laugh breaking through her tears. The three of us sat close, sharing that moment of release as dawn light filtered through the windows, painting the room in gentle gold. Later, we carried the canvas bag outside, the envelopes now empty, their truths recorded and honored. At the edge of the yard, I opened my hand and let each folded paper slip through my fingers, drifting away in the morning breeze. They twirled like small white petals until they vanished into the grass. My heart pounded with both loss and relief, but I watched until the last fragment disappeared. We returned to the porch steps, and I laid the leather notebook on the railing, spine down, ready for whatever came next. My jaw relaxed fully, and I breathed deep, the air filling my lungs without resistance. The day felt vast and new, every sound sharp and alive, the chirp of birds, distant lawn mowers, the hum of neighbors starting their routines. Mom sighed, pressing my hand. Dad draped an arm around both of us. We stood on the porch, three silhouettes against a waking world. My head tilted back as sunlight brushed my face, warmth seeping in. I thought of Uncle Mark's final words, that truth, no matter how painful, was a path to freedom. Here, in that quiet morning, I felt the first steps on that path unfolding. I woke with my jaw clenched, muscles stiff from hours of tense dreaming. The house was quiet except for the soft hum of the HVAC kicking on. I peeled myself out of bed, body sore, and padded down the hallway on bare feet, fingertips brushing the wall as though it could guide me. My chest felt knotted, like I'd carried the weight of Uncle Mark's secrets in my lungs. I paused outside my parents' bedroom, listening to their steady breathing, soothing and familiar, then slipped back to the living room, journal tucked under my arm. I sank onto the couch, flipping open to the page where Mark had confessed his fear of losing us. My eyes stung as I reread lines about his guilt and misguided methods. I pressed the notebook to my chest, feeling the crackle of its spine, and let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding. My hands trembled, and I pressed them into my thighs until the tremors softened. I realized forgiveness had lifted a weight, but a new restlessness buzzed beneath my skin. A soft click echoed behind me. Mom entered, bleary-eyed, clutching a mug of lukewarm tea. Blue light from the lamp caught the worry in her eyes. She sat beside me, offering the mug without a word. Its warmth seeped through my palms, steadying me. I traced the rim with my thumb and tilted it back, swallowing the bitter liquid in one breath. The warmth spread through my chest, and I felt calmer, ready to face what lay ahead. We spoke in murmurs about how to move forward, repair the torn edges of our trust, rebuild routines without ghosts lurking in closets. Mom suggested cooking together, something normal, mundane, healing. I nodded, imagining us in the kitchen, laughter bubbling over a sauce simmering on the stove. But beneath that, a flicker of doubt surfaced. Could we really leave the past behind? Or would its echoes ripple through every future memory? Dad joined us then, rubbing his temples as though the night's stress still gripped him. "I'll clear out Mark's study tomorrow," he said softly, voice thick. He glanced at the journal in my lap. "Let's decide what stays and what goes." His words were careful, respectful of my space. I closed the notebook and held out the first envelope, now empty, its edges softened by handling. "I think we keep these," I said, tracing the crease. "These reminders help us remember why honesty matters." He nodded, relief touching his eyes. "And we let go of his suspicion," he added. "No more secrets in this house." His vow sounded strong, but I noticed the set of his shoulders, still taut. I reached over, squeezing his arm, and felt his muscles relax beneath my hand. The three of us sat in quiet solidarity, ledger of open truths between us. That afternoon, we ventured into Uncle Mark's old study together, sunlight spilling through dusty blinds. Each of us carried a box, one for keepsakes, one for memories we'd discard. I felt my pulse quicken as I slid a photograph into my box, me and Mark at that family picnic, arms around each other, smiles bright. My fingers trembled holding it, but I placed it gently. It felt like reclaiming a fragment of our past before it fractured. Mom sorted through papers, Dad dismantled shelves, and I watched the motes of dust spiral in the light. Every so often, I caught a glance at the empty spot on the wall where Mark had hung his certificate of civic duty, remnant of his pursuit of justice. I wondered if he'd ever intended to return, or if this had always been his farewell. My chest tightened at the thought, but I pressed on, stacking old files into the discard box. By evening, the study looked bare, quiet as a heart after confession. We stood in the doorway, boxes in hand, and I felt an odd pang of loss, like saying goodbye to someone I'd only just begun to understand. Dad closed the door gently behind us. The click echoed in the hallway, final, deliberate. Back in the living room, we unpacked our boxes. The keepsake items, photographs, the leather notebook, small mementos, rested together on the coffee table. The discard box held torn pages, broken phone clips, tangled wires from Mark's hidden camera. I watched Mom seal the box and take it to the recycling bin outside. I felt a tug in my gut, relief mixed with sorrow. Some truths had to be let go for us to move on. I sank onto the couch, eyes heavy, and Mom joined me with a plate of freshly baked cookies, warm, sweet, comforting. I bit into one, feeling crumbs fall onto the notebook's cover. It was simple, grounding. Dad turned on soft music from the speakers, a quiet track with gentle piano. The notes drifted around us, and I felt the tension in my shoulders ease. We sat there, tasting normalcy again, the cookies' sweetness, the piano's lull, the gentle glow of the lamp. The night's reckoning had ended, but today's healing had begun. I closed my eyes, jaw unclenching at last, and let that moment hold me. I woke just before dawn, the sky still woven in inky threads, and felt the house settle around me like a familiar lullaby. My jaw uncurled as I stretched, every muscle in my shoulders sighing relief. The leather-bound notebook lay on my bedside table, its spine creased with every secret it held. I sat up slow, pressing my palms into the mattress until the tremor in my fingers faded. My chest felt lighter, though a dull ache lingered, reminder of the weight we'd carried and the work still ahead. I padded into the kitchen where Dad stirred coffee, the rich aroma curling through the cool air. Mom was there too, humming to herself as she sliced bread. The morning light was pale but warm, spilling across the countertop. I settled onto a stool, brushing a lock of hair behind my ear, and felt my heart ease at the sight of them. They looked ordinary, two parents who triumphed over a long night, yet I knew they carried the same scars, trust rebuilt from splinters, and hope tempered by pain. We drank coffee in companionable silence, broken only by clinks of mugs. My mouth was dry, so I took small sips, letting the heat fill me. Dad glanced at me, eyes soft. "Ready?" he asked quietly. I nodded, though my stomach fluttered. Today we would share marks of our reckoning with friends we'd kept at arm's length, people who deserved explanations, forgiveness, and maybe an olive branch. Later, we gathered at our living room table, sunlight drifting through blinds in lazy bars. Photos and notebook lay spread out like an open book of our family's truth. Mom had invited Aunt Claire and our neighbors, people who'd offered support but never seen the cracks beneath our smiles. When they arrived, their faces lit with warmth, I felt a surge of gratitude and fear that they'd see us as broken. But I straightened my shoulders, jaw free of tension, and welcomed them in. I began by reading Mark's note from the leather notebook, the apology stitched with love and regret. My voice trembled, but I pressed on, each word forging a bridge between past and future. Aunt Claire's hand found mine, and I felt her steady pulse. Mom wiped a tear that glistened in her eye, while Dad inhaled sharply, voice catching as he offered his own reflections, how shadows of suspicion had clouded our home and how the truth, fierce as it was, had chiseled away the fear. When the last page turned, the room held its breath. Then voices rose in gentle conversation, questions met with honest answers, confessions countered by comforting nods. I saw our neighbors reach for our hands, telling us they admired our courage. The awkwardness I feared dissolved into connection, and for the first time since that night, I sensed something new, community unburdened by secrets. That afternoon, we walked to the park, the air warm with promise. I brought the stack of empty envelopes and the notebook, laying them on a bench. I tore each cover thoughtfully, letting the pieces drift into the breeze, watching them dance away like old fears finally released. When the last fragment twirled off, I closed the notebook, spine soft, and tucked it into my jacket, ready to carry its lessons, not its weight. Mom took my hand, Dad draped an arm around both of us, and we strolled beneath trees whose leaves whispered above. The world felt vivid, children's laughter echoing, squirrels darting along trunks, sunlight flickering on pavement. My chest was full, no longer a hollow ache but a steady rhythm of hope and purpose. By evening, as we settled back at home with a simple dinner, I noticed how our laughter flowed easy now, unforced, genuine. My jaw stayed loose, and I felt my voice warm as I shared a silly story, Mom's eyes dancing in delight, Dad's hearty chuckle filling the room. The scars remained beneath the surface, but they no longer defined us. Later, I opened the notebook one last time, tracing the faded lines of Mark's final words. "Truth," he'd written, "sets the heart free." I closed it with a soft click and placed it on the shelf, among other mementos of our journey. I stood back, shoulders unburdened, and exhaled a breath I'd been holding for what felt like forever. In the quiet that followed, I realized the reckoning had reached its end, but our story continued, woven from honesty and love. And as I turned off the light and climbed into bed, I felt at peace, knowing we had faced the shadows, carried our truths into the light, and emerged whole.